August session of the 2017 Crisis Coach webinar series with the Eastern Great Lake Association of Continuity Professionals. That's a lot to say with only one cup of coffee this morning, and the Rochester Chamber. So we're glad to have you today. We're going to focus on, are you really prepared for an active shooter? Now, as you've attended these webinars in the past, you know that we ask you to join us on social media on Twitter at Firestorm Soul and on Facebook at Firestorm Solutions. There is a hashtag for today's session, and that's hashtag Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We empower you to manage crisis and risk. Our expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is America's crisis coach. It's really that balance between crisis and risk. And we follow a Predict, Plan, Perform methodology. Disclaimers, and everyone has attorneys, and they have to find a living too. So this presentation isn't complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussions. Any work product provided by Firestorm must be read in conjunction with guidance provided from your local, regional, or national authorities, as well as your organization's personnel counsel, and it shouldn't be interpreted today as legal advice or legal opinion. We have, representing the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Professionals, Dr. Michael Redmond, and Dr. Redmond's not on right now, but I know that there's a big event coming up next month, and it's the annual September session, and I would encourage you to go to their website, find that, and sign up for it. It's a great opportunity to do peer meeting with your counterparts, and you'll hear from national speakers. I know that Dr. Redmond's been reaching out, trying to line up a speaking panel. I spoke to a person who'd been approached yesterday, and then we had gotten a call also. So I think it's a great opportunity, and if I'm able to get it into the schedule, I would look forward to seeing you face-to-face there. Certainly a great opportunity to network. Now, as you look at that site, you see that in the past, the ACP has updated their website and changed, and you can also go to firestorm.com, watch past webinars, and register for future events. Today, we're very fortunate to have Marc Connolly with us today. Marc is the Executive Vice President of Secure Ed. Marc is a retired Secret Service special agent. He's also been an Associate Director of the Secret Service, and he's going to bring some unique insights into the area of active shooter and what we need to be doing in those areas. Marc, anything you want to say at the beginning of our broadcast today?
Yeah, just thanks very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it. As Jim mentioned, I spent 27 years with the Secret Service. Obviously, working when I retired, I was the Deputy Special Agent in charge of the Presidential Protective Division. So I spent a lot of time working on kind of complex and tricky security issues. So it's a pleasure to speak with you this morning to talk about an issue that's obviously very important and concerning, is how prepared we are to in our businesses, in our schools, in our houses of worship to respond to the threat of an active shooter. So I appreciate the opportunity, Jim.
I met with Marc and Jason. They built the company together this weekend as we were holding a meeting with folks from all over the country in Atlanta. I know you're going to be in for a treat today to hear some things you haven't heard before and have them framed differently in how you need to manage and proceed. I'm Jim Satterfield. I'm the President and CEO of Firestorm, and I'm glad to be with you again today. When we think about this area, we're going to be focusing on workplace violence prevention and then how we respond in those events. And you're going to hear some things today from Marc in particular that may be a little different from what you have seen in the past, the way that your facilities are designed and then the actions that you need to take at that period of time when it occurs. I'm also going to comment a little bit about the shootings that occurred in June in Orlando. Very small company, 34 people, 4 people were shot and killed. And the quote you see on the top of the screen, "I wish they would have just listened to my concerns," is again another example where there were behaviors of concern, and this was escalating in that area. And if they had acted, that event would have never occurred. So we're going to focus our comments today around before, during, and after an active shooter event and as a specific concern. And hopefully it'll come across today as a conversation. That's what we're hoping to focus on. So where do you start in all of these areas? When we talk about physical security, we generally use three words: access, awareness, and actions. Access would be how do we keep the bad guys out? That would be fences and gates and doors and locks, password systems to get in with cards or those elements associated. Awareness is how do we know our security's been breached? That would be lights, cameras, alarm systems that go off if the door is opened inappropriately. And then finally, actions. What do you want your people to do? That's the foundation by which you build a workplace violence prevention program. Now, you go forward into identify behaviors of concern before they escalate. What are the things to look for that you must be able to recognize and then actually intervene before it gets that way? A security site assessment is an important element, and Marc will talk about that and some of the things that he's seen and done. They have an interesting way to work with you if you're in the process of building, to actually build into the engineering of that building, into the design, the security elements, and the efficiency of that's greatly enhanced. Obviously, emergency plans, training. Also, I'll ask Marc to share how they're doing their training with using video cameras and monitors to be able to track what is going on in each one of those elements. Then go through an active shooter response. We'll talk just briefly about crisis management and insurance afterwards. So we've got a full schedule, so let's move on a little bit at this point. Now, this is the company just outside of Orlando. The shootings occurred in June. But if you look at the nature of what they do, it was only 34 employees as they were working with enhancements on RVs. Now, a former worker who had had concerns raised about him back in 2014 came to work that day and killed 4 people. By the way, if you see your company in a view from a helicopter going on the air, obviously you know that you have a problem. You can see physically where they're located in the Orlando area. This is the former employee who talked about there was a problem there. He got into a confrontation with this person back in 2014 and identified him as a potential risk within the organization. As a result of that, he was terminated, not the other party. Here's another. Look at the screenshot from the helicopter. You start to see the police cars circling your building and the officers outstanding. You know that something's up there. As he talked about the items that were going on, you can see how there was active discussion here. Threats were made. All of these are alarm bells that should be going off, that there's something going on with this particular individual. He then said, you'll see his comments here, but I bolded the last line. I wish they would have just listened to my concerns. Now think about that 4 people would be alive today had they listened to his concerns and intervened, got the shooter help, prevented those events from occurring. These types of scenes, when we see them around your building and knowing that they're going on, that's going to disrupt this organization for every day following. The impact is real. And one of the things that gets lost in our discussions is the people. And that's the reason why I put up the slides with their faces. So when we talk about active shooters, when we talk about workplace violence, we're talking about the people that are in your office where you go every single day and what you hear. And they put this sign up on their website. You can tell that obviously they're heartbroken. That's what we want to avoid. So as we think about those things, they're barriers to preparedness. Marc, what do you see when you think about barriers to preparedness?
Well, one of the big things that we see when we visit with our clients throughout the country is just a lack of belief that this could happen to us. And the reason that fire alarm is up on the screen is think about what we do in our schools, in our houses of worship, in our factories, our businesses. What do we do in relationship to being prepared for a fire? And every time we've gone out and given presentations or conducted our training, there's always things in those facilities associated with either fire prevention, fire detection, alert mechanisms, things like that. And the vast majority, a good chunk of our clients are schools. And think about when you were in school, you doing fire drills. If I said stop, drop, all of you probably could finish out that phrase and say roll. And how do we know all this? Is because we're concerned about the threat of fire. And going back to schools, there hasn't been a child in the United States of America lost as a result of a fire, has perished as a result of a fire in over 65 years, which is a fantastic thing. We basically in this country have mitigated or neutralized that threat in relationship to taking a child's life in a school environment. But think about other types of threats. How many children in the last 65 years have been lost as a result of a gunfire or other dangerous weapons? And are we doing the same types of things? Are we preparing in the same type of way for that type of threat? So I think it's that, kind of head in the sand mentality, this will never happen to us. That's probably one of the greatest barriers that we see in relationship to be prepared for this other type of threat.
Mark, that statistic is staggering when you think about it. Over 65 years without the death of a child in a school fire. Unfortunately, when we talk about violence in schools or violence in the workplace, that's a bridge that just seems to be impossible to cross. We won't, and our focus clearly has to be how do we get similar statistics with 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually in the United States, with 2 million episodes of bullying annually in the United States in our schools. As you add those up, it seems we can't go a day without hearing about a violent act. OSHA's identified it as a known hazard. We're all required to have a plan. So the barriers obviously continue to grow out there. Talk a little bit more about what the cause would be.
Some of the other barriers that we see beyond is the belief is, okay, yeah, I would like to do something. I would like to develop a good, robust security program, but maybe I don't have the budget for it. So cost, geez, do I have the money for the alarms, the cameras, the access control systems, the, more robust locking mechanisms? I'd like to do it, but I don't have the budget. So cost is certainly, I think, one of the prohibitive things that we see routinely. The other things, aesthetics. Geez, this doesn't look good. It's going to change the feel of the environment that I work in. It's going to change. We don't like our businesses, our schools, our houses of worship, our homes, so the places where we reside, to look like Supermax prison. We don't want to see concertina wire. We don't want to see all these barricades. We don't want to see bars and gates. So aesthetics. Again, going back to the school environments that we routinely work in, they want to be welcoming and nurturing environments. We don't want to have, all the shades drawn and fences and gates and things like that. So how does it look? How does it make us feel? Changing the environment. Again, working in the Secret Service for all the years we did, the appearance of the security, trying to make it as discreet as possible was very important because the aesthetics for the people we protected were important. And so that's another, I think, significant barrier that we found. And finally, it's the belief. I just don't believe this is a possibility in my life. We like to, all of us like to exist in very peaceful and type of serene and secure environments. So when we inject that potential threats, or we have to think about potential threats, it disrupts that state that we normally like to be in. And so That is, I think that's important. And finally, inconvenience. Security by its very nature creates a little inconvenience. It puts barriers for freedom. It's barriers to access. Think about if you've ever been locked out of your car or locked out of your house. That inconvenience, hey, I don't want to experience that. I want to be able to freely come and go. I want to have free access. And so those are I think those four things: inconvenience, belief, the aesthetics, and the cost are the things that we routinely see as barriers for people to begin and start and have robust security programs.
The cartoon that's there, Mark, I know that's actually Bill Baker, the second gentleman from the left. And as you go through the airport and the pressures that we're under, it's obviously been a disruption into our lives. And so I can certainly see how the inconvenience and the aesthetics come. Razor wire around your building sends a specific message. So as we get into it, I think we want to think about when do we want to be prepared, and then how we find that balance. So let's talk about, when do we want preparation?
Well, I think we want preparation when we've crossed over that threshold with belief and we actually feel threatened. The things that we go through as far as airport security would not have been acceptable to us in August of 2001. Following the attacks on 9/11, we realized, wow, there's actually a legitimate threat here relationship to air security. And so we accept, we may not like it, but we accept the additional security measures that we all go through when we travel on commercial airlines. So when we feel threatened, we'll actually do the things or begin the processes to have robust and effective security plans. When you're driving down the highway, you don't necessarily feel comfortable of having that, state trooper behind you. His presence there may not be comforting to you, but if there is a threat to your residence, it's a threat to your person, it's a threat to your business, that's when you want the law enforcement presence to be there. So when you feel threatened, you'll do the things, in that belief kicks in, you'll do the things necessary to protect yourself.
And I want to see that. I want to see those elements, but there has to be some balance.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have found is that you can go overboard. And if you go overboard with security, if the security measures are so draconian, or there creates such inconvenience, or it disrupts or changes the actual environment that you're used to being in so dramatically, if their life is about competing values, and if those security measures become overly burdensome, then they won't be effective. They won't be welcome. They won't be effective. And what we routinely see is people, they may have all the policy and procedures and actually the physical or technical security measures in place, but because the security is so either oppressive or burdensome, or it creates such inconvenience, we see employees or staff members doing everything they can to bypass those things, propping those doors open, even though you have a great, secure, controlled entry system. So you have to have the right balance between the security and the freedom. Again, life is about those competing values and trying to find that sweet spot. We had to, again, going back to my Secret Service experience, find that balance all the time, because what we were trying to do, the events we were trying to protect, or the people we were trying to protect, they wanted people to come to them. They wanted people to have access. We have over maybe 1 million visitors to the White House complex every year that are coming inside those gates. So we had to adjust our security measures to take into account those kind of competing values. And I think when you do that, when you find that kind of sweet spot, that's when you have, I think, in the balances there, a really effective security program that can stand the test of time.
All right, so let's go in and look in that balance, and there's obviously a process by which those things are done, and we see a lot of things on a site assessment. We've seen emergency plans, obviously training around it. Go into depth a little, if you would. Let's talk about a security site assessment and what does that mean and what are you looking for? So back to you, Mark.
Yeah, I think we think like kind of the three legs of the stool of a good security program are site assessment, a good emergency plan, and then some training to back those things up. So starting with the site assessment, for us, that's really a granular look at your environment. What are you trying to protect? And we'll go and visit, manufacturing facilities. We'll go and visit government buildings. We'll go and visit schools, for example, and do a really granular examination of that facility. We'll look at what's around the facility itself. We'll look at the exterior design features, interior design features, and are there any security features that are integrated into those areas. We'll look at your policy and procedures and finally your equipment in training. And we do a really 360 granular examination of that facility to look at its strengths and look at its weaknesses. Every facility is unique for the most part. There may be a lot of similarities in some of the features, but just based on where they're physically located, the environment will change. So we don't take a cookie cutter approach, and we look at the strengths and weaknesses, try to identify any vulnerabilities, try to see if the policy and procedures, the operating principles of that facility support kind of the design features, and in doing so, we can then kind of make some recommendations associated with response protocols, knowing that, hey, if we don't have, for example, we go to a lot of places that they'll have a lockdown plan, but looking at the rooms or looking at the doors, they'll have spaces that are secured by doors, but those doors don't have locks. So how do you do an actual lockdown procedure if your doors don't have locks on them? We see people that have been taught to barricade their doors in an event of a violent intruder. But looking at the doors, all their doors in this specific facility I'm referencing, all their doors opened out. So how do you barricade a door that opens out into the hallway as opposed to one that opens into the room? So it's doing that kind of granular examination of the design features and the policy and procedures that we can best make kind of recommendations on response protocols.
Great. And then obviously you have to have some kind of a plan.
You have to have a plan. One of the things, again, we have found is a lot of people are in certain environments are tasked with coming up with the emergency plan, but they have never had any experience in being involved in emergencies. So we try to help provide some guidance associated with this. And the key components of any good emergency plan are, one, identifying the types of emergencies that you potentially could experience. And they're all going to be different, and focusing on the ones that are most likely. That's why, for example, everybody concentrates almost universally on fire. That's one element. Everybody has a plan associated with it. Most, I'm sure the people who are listening have participated or continue to participate in fire drills. So but it's also important to identify other types of emergencies, whether it's from severe weather, whether it's from bomb threats, whether it's something related to the facility, whether it's such as a gas leak. Whether it is a violent intruder or active shooter, identifying those potential threats, then coming up with some response protocols, and which I think really important is having very clear delineations on who is supposed to do what in relationship to this emergency, because there's going to be different roles and responsibilities. So making sure we've kind of delineated who's going to do what in relationship to the threats that we've identified, And then finally with that emergency plan is identifying the resources we need to go ahead and execute some of these protocols. So making sure that we have the emergency supplies or any equipment that we may need, any communication devices that we may need, any contact information that we may need in the event that we actually have an emergency and now we're executing our plan.
And obviously we've seen plans that are focused to NIMS or the ICS, Incident Command Structure, but anytime you're running a plan, it has to be designed of who is the audience of the plan. Is it the people that are leading the emergency response? Is it the employee? There'll be different readers at different times associated with it. Well, that's great that we've done an assessment and know the exposures. It's great that we have a plan, but you do something completely different in critical incident response training. And I think when you look at that word selection as opposed to we're going to have a drill or an evacuation, you get a different feeling. So talk a little bit about the training you do.
Well, the training we do, our critical incident response training, we'll do a couple scenarios, focus specifically on that violent intruder or active shooter. And what we do, we work with our clients is we'll actually have them partake in the scenario. The first one, we call it the untrained scenario, because we're just trying to assess, get a baseline of hey, where they are right now as far as their capabilities, their preparedness, and to respond to that type of threat. So we'll actually play the role of the active shooter in order to kind of stress our clients a little bit, to give them a little bit of a real life sense of, hey, this is what's happening. We actually videotape using GoPro cameras so they can watch what they did and what they didn't do. And it gives them a little bit of a realistic experience. We think that's important to inject a little bit of realism into the scenario in training, and just
Marc,
watch what they did. Yes.
You used the term the GoPro camera. Talk just a second about that.
Well, the GoPro camera, it's just a small camera that we actually can put on a harness. So it's worn by the consultant who's playing the role of the active shooter. So basically, as he or she moves through the facility, trying to look for targets, it captures all that. So again, the scenario is captured as in real time and as realistically as possible. So, and it's also recorded, so we can hear what people have said, what they do, what they don't do. Do they evacuate? Do they try to confront? Are they warning their fellow employees that this is has come to their facility? Are they alerting, which is very important to us. So it gives a very realistic presentation when they come back and see, because what you think you did may not be actually what you did. So the ability to kind of play it back in real time is a great teaching tool.
Good. And anything else on the training you want to add in at this point?
Well, just that it's important to actually do it. It's great to have, as part of the security program, doing the site assessment, understanding your environment is really important. Having good emergency plans or protocols that back that up is really important. But the training is critically important, because we say at our company that people don't typically rise to the occasion; they sink to the level of their training. So if you have not given yourself a script to follow, if you've never been in that situation before, then the likelihood of you making, correct, effective, and efficient choices in relation to that threat are really, really low, as opposed to if you've given yourself the script, if you've been through this scenario in training. We watch not only we do the scenario a couple times in each session, and the difference between the first one and the second one is usually incredibly dramatic because they have been given some tips and tools. They've thought about what their response should be. They've given themselves type of a script, and that's what they fall back on. And the clients that work with us for several years, it's even more dramatic because they practiced it. They know immediately what to do. So when you hear a fire alarm, it's everyone in the facility hears it, they know what it means, and they've typically been trained over and over again on what to do. And so we're trying to replicate that with this type of threat as well. So the support that the training gives to your assessment and to your policy, into your emergency plan is very, very important.
Okay, the alarm goes off. You showed an alarm earlier. There's been a statement. There's an active shooter present here. Let's talk through that response actions when that alert goes out. What do we do?
We keep it real simple, Jim, and we think there are only three things. You really only have three things, if you think about it, that you can do in response to an active shooter. You can evacuate, you can secure, or you can confront. And for me, my all-time favorite, if I could choose one, is to evacuate, which is to get away from the problem, to get as far away from the problem as you possibly can. Can I get out of the facility? What are my means, or what are my ways that I can get out of the facility? Where am I in relationship to those exits or a window that can allow me to evacuate, to escape from this threat? You've heard other, terminology bounced around. I think, I remember being back in the federal government, run, hide, or fight. We think the terms that we use are a little bit more forceful and give you a little bit more clearer direction. So when you say run, yeah, run where? Are you running to the problem, or are you running just to another portion of the building? So we think that evacuate makes it a little bit clearer. We want you to physically get away from the facility and do that as efficiently and effectively as you can. Second, if that option isn't available to you, maybe secure yourself, and that's getting behind a locked or a barricaded door into a facility, and then getting some cover or concealment, getting behind something in that locked room that would give you additional protection from the threat of gunfire. So securing yourself there's some kind of secondary or even tertiary recommendations, such as closing lights, or shutting off lights, or pulling down the blinds and silencing the cell phones. Those are, I think, important, and we would recommend them, but the most important ones, the ones you need to immediately focus on, is getting behind that secure or really heavily barricaded door, and then protecting yourself with some cover or concealment. And then finally, and this is the one I said evacuate was my favorite. This one is my least favorite, which is confront. You may, unfortunately, not have the ability to do one of the two other ones. You can't get away, you can't secure, because the problem has just been sprung upon you. You're in the entryway. You're one of the first people to engage with this person, and you may not, again, have the option to do one of the other two. You have to think about confronting. You have to think about defending yourself and protecting yourself and the other people around you. And that has been done. It may not seem like a fantastic option, and it isn't a fantastic option, but it has been successfully done, especially with groups that are working in pairs, groups that have found something that they can use to defend themselves, or are throwing objects, or just storming, the intruder, working collectively, thinking about the vulnerable areas of the body, that the eyes, the nose, the groin areas, and attacking those areas with either your person or things that you can utilize to weaponize, if you will, whether it's a laptop computer, whether it's some tools in the facility, whether it's a fire extinguisher, or cutlery that's, you know, in your office kitchen, or, you know, anything that can be used to defend yourself, even a belt that's, you know, that's on your person, taking that belt off and using it as a weapon. Those are things, you know, to think about on the front end. Again, trying to give yourself a script that, hey, this is, if this is your only option, then you need to exercise that option.
These words are different than run, hide, fight. That's the standard that you hear across America and pushed out in a variety of different ways. But if you think about the subtle difference of the packaging of evacuate versus run. Run where? What does that mean? Think about hide. If you're hiding, it's a symbol of cowering. And hide in those areas. Securing is a positive statement. It's direction. Fight is different than. So these words, if you'll start to use this terminology as you talk to your people, it gives you more power and gives them empowerment to be able to take control of what's going to occur in their life. When I met Marc and Jason, and we've worked together now on a variety of different assessments and support from wide ranges of organizations, from technology firms to organizations that provide support to people in trouble, to schools. This concept of evacuate, secure, confront puts the power back into your organization instead of just chaos. People running around, that's chaos. People hiding, and then selective fighting associated within this. So that, coupled with the untrained first step where he goes in with the camera and lets people see what they would actually do in that area, then you do the training and you look at the improvement. Remember the quote at the very beginning. In over 65 years, we've not had a child die in a school fight. What can we do to make sure that the episodes that we saw in Florida don't occur again within your organization? That was a company with 34 people died. Think about that impact if that had occurred at your organization and the difference. So fundamentally here, it's not only the front, it's the during, and then it's the after. You've heard us talk a lot about these type of things and working here. In fact, you see the letters EAF, that's an association in Florida that we work with their members around it, but it's something that was to you and your organization, and that's the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program. That's identifying these behaviors before they're actually threats, before there's violence. Just at the time when the concern starts to rise, if you intervene then we're going to have a positive outcome from everyone associated with it. We've talked a lot about that. I think that's an important foundation that you have to have in place. And we certainly would want to talk with you about that. And we'll try to reach out to everyone on today's webinar and answer any questions around it. But if you tie that back to the physical security assessment, how do you engineer security into your facility? If it's a new construct or if it's a retrofit, those areas are different. Seeing the rock by the door in the back that somebody pops open so they can have ventilation coming through. Seeing the parking lot being dark at night when people are coming out in the winter months and the exposure that's there. The gaps in the fence, the litter, the trash that's around the building, all indicators of a lack of control and access. Is there a panic button at the front desk? How do those elements come into play? Is there a written plan? Does everybody understand their rules and what their directions are? A meeting place outside the building could create a secondary target. So can you have a virtual meeting place that individuals can go to indicate that they're okay as we put those elements back in place? We can talk about a reunification plan in a school environment. How do we get our parents back in touch with our students and have that transition effectively managed? And then once we get the plan in place, then training so everyone knows their role. and they're reacting. There's muscle memory here, because that's going to give them confidence to deal with a horrific event. Do I think that there's going to be an active shooter at your location today? No, I don't. I think the law of large numbers, as we think about risk and insurance and what does that mean, I don't think it's going to happen in your building today. The firm in Florida didn't think it was going to happen that day either. So since we don't know when, we want to have the record that we have children in school from fire. How do we do that to have that from a violence standpoint within your organization? Now, we work in a variety of industries, as many of you probably have similar contacts, and it's not unusual when we go into a mining facility or a manufacturing facility to see a poster that's updated on a daily basis, or an electronic display, this many days since the last accident, this many days since the last behavior of concern, this many days since the last threat, this many days since the last act of violence. Because with 2 million episodes annually in the United States, we're up against a surge. We ask a survey, and we do that, and I do it with a live audience. Do you think violence in America is increasing or decreasing? And universally, the answer is it's increasing. There will be a paper from today's webinar. You can go to firestorm.com/briefs and download it. It'll be up next week, and you'll have access to it. There'll be a recording of today's webinar that you can share with others within your organization. So going there and downloading that brief will make a difference. We'd like to thank the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Planners for underwriting and supporting this webinar series, and I would remind you, go to the website, take a look at their upcoming event next month. I believe you will find it a great opportunity to network and meet others. If my schedule can work, I look forward to the chance to meet you in person. But the types of things we're talking about today will make a difference. Marc, anything you want to share with us now about the active shooter and all of the information that you gave us today?
No, well, thank you again for the opportunity to talk about this. I think concerning but important subject, and just to kind of reiterate some of Jim's comments, it really goes back to that concept of belief. It's not likely to happen, but it is possible, and if you believe it is possible, then the smart thing to do is do those things to help prepare yourself as much as you can to protect yourself from that potential threat, which is, hey, doing that assessment, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your facility, have robust and comprehensive security plans, and routinely and regularly train yourselves and your staffs and your fellow employees to conduct some training and exercise those response protocols to make sure that, God forbid, this event ever does come to your doorstep, you're as prepared as you possibly can be to protect yourselves from that threat.
Marc, thanks for decades of service to America as a Secret Service agent and as Assistant Deputy Director. I think that background and experience of seeing the planning at that level and having it come back so that this can be done affordably at the level of our companies and organizations that are listening, it makes a real difference. If you would like some additional information, you can go to firestorm.com and download the brief from today's event, watch other webinars. If you've got a question, send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com or call us at 800-321-2219. Firestorm has a program, it's called Crisis Stop. If you find you're in a situation, in a crisis, pick up the phone and call us. We will respond, and in that first hour, there is no charge. We'll help you stabilize the events, trigger the resources that you need, opine on the consequences and the exposures that are going to come, and prevent you from making the common mistakes. We're faced in those of you that are business continuity professionals, they call organization faces a crisis at any point, Firestorm is standing there to help you, and we'll provide that support virtually for you 24/7. Bill took a call yesterday from an organization. They had a security guard who had a gun. The gun was misfired, and the bullet left where he was and went through a wall and through an office, exited. Fortunately, no one was hit. When you think about it, there's a crisis that could occur every day. Thanks, everyone, for your time today. Mark, we really appreciate your insights. And
Jim, we lost your voice.